Hello and welcome to our Q&A, our monthly Q&A, which happens to fall on the Monday in October for Monday, October the 7th. So thank you for joining us. We're going to be starting shortly. Just want to remind everyone that you're free to ask questions as we go along or submit the questions in advance for each and every month for our Q&A. It's an opportunity to sit back, relax, and just take in some information. As I always mention, knowledge is potential power. It's what we do with the knowledge that is the game changer. So thank you for joining. We'll get started now. My name is Sandra Wallace. I am a OCD, anxiety, and depression coach, and I want to welcome you to the Q&A and would be more than happy to address any questions that you may have as we go along. So as I mentioned, the time zone is Central Standard Time. I'm out of Canada, Manitoba. So we go by Central Standard Time. So if you just set your clocks and make sure that you are within that time range. I know some people have come on later and it can get confusing. So make sure that you know your time zone as compared to Central Standard Time. We have people that join from all across different country zones, time zones. So remember, it's Central Standard Time. And we always send out a link in advance, and the Zoom meeting link is here. So for those of you who are wondering for next month, we'll do exactly the same and prepare you and remind you well in advance. Okay, so tonight's topic is about ERP. Last month, we dove into ERP, which stands for Exposure Response Prevention. And we also talked about different therapies and why ERP is so effective. So if you haven't had a chance to look at that, go back and we have all our previous episodes on YouTube, on our website, and on different social media platforms. So be sure to send us an email if you have any questions as you go through previous information. But tonight's topic continues with ERP, and it relates to anxiety. So how does exposure to our feared stimuli in ERP help reduce anxiety over time? Great question. Thank you for that. Now, what I'm going to say is that exposure to the feared stimuli, whether it's in vivo, which is live exposure, or imaginary exposure, what the whole purpose of ERP is to reduce the anxiety over time. Now, the key word is over time. It's not going to happen after you expose yourself to something once. The whole key to this, in order for it to work, there has to be a process called habituation. Now, habituation needs a few things in order to make it successful for us. And this was the form of treatment. The cognitive behavior therapy was a form of treatment I used to overcome all of my anxiety and my OCD. And within that therapy, there's the technique called ERP. So first of all, we have to expose ourselves to the feared stimuli. So we're not intentionally, we are intentionally exposing ourselves to the thoughts, maybe their images or their actual real life situations that trigger our anxiety. These stimuli are typically related to our obsessive fears. So whether it be a fear of heights, a fear of going places, which is social phobia, maybe a specific phobia like flying or afraid of spiders or camping, or generalized anxiety, which is just anxiety, a heightened level of anxiety all the time. Those are just a few examples, but they need to be, the ERP has to be geared specifically to the person's fears. That's why I love doing the tailor-made programs for each and every one of my clients, to make it very geared to what their needs are. It's not a cookie cutter or a generalized type of exposure. It's very custom made and tailor-made. The second thing is the response prevention. Now, this is key. When you're out doing your exposure, which means you're facing your fears, you must be able to refrain from performing your usual compulsive behavior, which usually helps to bring down the anxiety. And it's interesting because the words that I'm using relate both to anxiety and both to people living with OCD. Now, I want to be clear that not everyone with anxiety will have OCD. That's obvious to us. But everybody with OCD has anxiety. But interesting enough, the treatment technique and therapy is the same for both. So I love that we can incorporate the same treatment, whether you're living with anxiety and no OCD or both. Number 3, the important thing is the anxiety is going to spike. There's no way around that, obviously, because the mere thing that we are trying to avoid, run from, stop ourselves from thinking about, and doing compulsions, which are acts. They could be physical acts or mental acts to help bring down the anxiety. Now we're actually bringing ourselves to the forefront and exposing ourselves to that very fear. So naturally, it's going to cause an increase in the anxiety because you're facing it now. Remember, there's no way around fear. Rather, you need to go through fear. You need to face it head on. But there are strategies that I use as a coach to help that process make it a little bit easier for you. So you need to confront your fears without relying on the usual compulsions to relieve the distress. The 4th thing you have to keep in mind is gradual anxiety reduction. And I emphasize gradual. This is what will result in what we call habituation. And habituation merely is over time, as you're able to stay in that anxiety-provoking situation, excuse me, without avoiding it or doing your compulsion, so too will your brain be able to stay in it. It will start to learn that that feared outcome does not happen, or it's less threatening than initially believed. Excuse me. Now think about a situation where you may have thought of something where you procrastinate. Maybe it's going grocery shopping, aside from anxiety, just daily habits. Excuse me. It might be doing our income tax. We just dread it. Or going out to a wedding because you don't like, socializing. You like to have your weekends to yourself. The interesting thing is, ask yourself, how many times in different situations were you in where once you actually went through it and did it, it wasn't as scary as it was that we created in our mind. And often that's the case. So too is this situation when we come to our anxiety. When we start to face it, a lot of times my clients will say, I'm really surprised that it's not so bad. Sorry about that. I had a little bit of a cough. Excuse me. So think about a situation where that might have occurred for you. So again, now, as we face it, we become what we call desensitized. If you just break that word down, normally we're sensitized to everything, our environment, our thoughts, being around other people, worried about anticipatory anxiety about what lies ahead. Now what we're doing through the form of habituation is desensitizing ourselves. So by repeated exposures to these fears, the actual feared stimuli gradually diminishes and it slowly goes away, excuse me, and the individual becomes what we call desensitized. So then we learn that we can tolerate the anxiety and it will naturally decrease without the need for any compulsions. Now, I want to repeat that. The anxiety will naturally, so without having to do our compulsions, without having to try to control our environment and control the results, our brain will naturally be able to decrease the anxiety on its own without the need for compulsions. This is huge. If there's anything you take away tonight, I hope this will be one of the main important pieces of information. This is what I had a lot of difficulty with when I was going through my OCD and anxiety. I couldn't fathom the thought of it going away naturally, because for all my life I was controlling my environment. I was putting all the safety nets in place. I was avoiding. I was getting reassurance from others and checking. And excuse me, I needed to do that because I thought if I don't do that, there'd be catastrophic events that occur and it would be all my fault. And that we call that hyper responsibility OCD. So once I was able to accept this and start doing the ERP, I was able to learn that this is actually what takes place. And it was comforting to know after I was able to focus and be able to get results. So I'd like you to start by knowing that it is possible. You just need to start the process. Okay. So, sorry. Okay. So I'm just going to carry on. I just start the slideshow. There. Okay. So next, let me just resume slideshow. The sixth most important piece is the cognitive shift. Through this process, through habituation, first of all, through exposure response prevention, through habituation, through desensitization, you will learn to develop new and more realistic beliefs about the feared stimuli. And this will, as a result, gain confidence in your ability to handle distress without avoidance or compulsions. Another piece I'd like to add in this part is that I have people work through their challenging their faulty belief systems, because it's the thoughts and the things that we talk to ourselves about that create the anxiety. So if we can start challenging our faulty belief system, because that's what it is, and learn to think more realistic about the beliefs, then the anxiety and the fear comes down naturally. So in short, ERP works by teaching the brain that the feared stimuli are not as dangerous as they seem. They reduce the intensity of the fear response over time. Now, another question that came in is, what role does habituation play in the success of ERP, specifically for anxiety treatment and OCD? Well, I'm here to tell you it's a huge role. And if you haven't figured that out just based on what I've said up to this point, it's really a main piece of being able to overcome it. It is the central role in the success of ERP for anxiety. And I'm going to share with you a few reasons why. Excuse me. By doing the gradual decrease in anxiety, the habituation refers to the natural decrease in anxiety when you do repeated exposure to a feared stimulus without avoiding it or using compulsions. The key word here is repetition. You must do it repeatedly. So in ERP, the more times we face those fears, like an obsessive thought or an anxiety-provoking situation, the more our anxiety lessens over time, because our brain gets used to the stimulus. Okay, it's not so scary anymore. It comes in, but it's only through repetition. If you do something once and don't do it again for a long time, then it's like starting over. So we need to stay consistent. We plan, when I'm coaching individuals, we lay out a game plan for the week, what a client's going to do every day to do their exposure, how long. We document the anxiety before they start, the anxiety sometimes midway, and the anxiety after. And then we summarize, we get a snapshot of how their exposure went. And then I'm able to review that and give recommendations on how to tweak it, how to move to the next step, how to be able to challenge the roadblocks that we might have as we do our ERP. The second thing is learning that fears are unfounded. So if you don't engage in avoidance or compulsion during exposure, then you can learn that the feared consequences are either less likely to occur or not as catastrophic as we initially thought. Like I said earlier, it's a lot scarier in our head than actually going through the real life exposure. Not to say that it's not scary, and not to say that it's not going to be anxiety provoking, especially initially. We just know that over time it gets better. Habituation will also teach the brain that those situations that you and I have feared, maybe sometimes a lifetime or for months or weeks or however long the duration is, they are not as threatening as they seem. And then we're able to weaken that fear response. The third thing to keep in mind is the tolerance of our discomfort. Over time, we're able to tolerate that discomfort without seeking relief through compulsions. And I can't tell you how rewarding that is. The brain learns that anxiety will decrease naturally without the need for rituals or avoidance, empowering the individual to face their fears. I want to say that again, tolerance of discomfort. Over time, the habituation that we create by doing ERP over and over allows individuals to be able to tolerate that discomfort on your own without having to do something as a safety net. And as a result of this, our brains learn that the anxiety will come down naturally. Our brains are in the fight or flight mode. Our brain is there to protect us and give us messages to stay safe. But guess what? Through ERP, we can maintain safety without having to do a compulsion, and we can learn to live with uncertainty long enough to know otherwise. Breaking the anxiety cycle is another piece to this. The anxiety that we bring on in our minds, in our physical and our mental state, often creates that cycle where we avoid, where we have a lot of avoidance or compulsions, which temporarily reduce our anxiety. But guess what? As it temporarily brings down the anxiety, it's doing another thing that is detrimental to our well-being. It reinforces the belief that the fear is valid. So habituation helps to interrupt this cycle by reducing the automatic fear response and weakening the link between the stimulus and anxiety. So I really want you to know that the anxiety that we are experiencing on a regular basis is creating a cycle where we continue to avoid more and we continue to do compulsions more. But if you are able to work with me as your coach, I can help guide you and teach you that habituation can and will occur. And the best thing about habituation is it interrupts this vicious anxiety cycle by reducing the automatic fear response and weakening the link between your stimulus and the anxiety. So in summary, habituation helps us get used to our anxiety triggers, which is key to reducing anxiety long-term and improving our quality of life. Who doesn't want that? Ask yourself, when last did you not have anxiety present in your day-to-day life? And how is that working out for you? I'm going to guess that it is not working out. If you're anything like me, the anxiety monopolized my life. It dictated. It was a dictator. It told me where I can go, what I can do, who I can see, and it always came at a cost to the point where I was housebound. If you want to change your life and be able to have freedom from anxiety, you need to know the step-by-step approach in order to be able to accomplish that. So please, if you're interested in learning more about it, get on a 15-minute call with me and we can walk through it together and I can answer any questions you may have about the process. But ERP is key in being able to overcome your anxiety. Next, the question that we often get asked is, how can ERP be tailored to your individual needs, especially if your anxiety is severe? I've had many clients come to me after visiting one or two or three other healthcare professionals, and their anxiety is peaked, and it is the most severe that they have ever experienced. And I'm glad to be able to offer the clients a tailor-made program where it's tailored specific to your needs, especially when anxiety is severe. Because when anxiety is severe, we have to be very mindful, very cautious, and strategic on how we're going to create a tailor-made program. It is critical for it to be effective. So, excuse me, let's talk about some strategies to customize ERP. So in order to be successful in ERP, we need to be able to tailor make a program. And I have to say, this is one of my favorite parts of working with clients when I'm coaching. It's also my favorite part to be able to provide this information, to provide hope and optimism, not only for clients, but for their family, their friends, and sometimes even their workplace, to inspire them that there is ways that we can get around the anxiety and we can live and work through it effectively. So just know that there are strategies in place to customize ERP. So first of all, what I like to do is do a gradual exposure hierarchical approach, meaning I get everything out on the table. We write everything down as far as where your anxiety lies, in what environments is it showing up, how severe is it, what are you doing to avoid it, what are you doing as a compulsion to bring down the anxiety, everything from start to finish. So I get a really good snapshot of what it is that you're going through. And then, as I said, my favorite part, I help create a personalized list of all your feared situations or thoughts. I help you with that. We create it all. And then we start to rank it. We need to know what's less anxiety provoking, what's middle of the road anxiety provoking, what's the highest end. And then we're able to start manageable exposures and slowly and gradually work our way up as you learn to gain confidence in yourself. And there's nothing greater than seeing people come back to me in their following sessions and saying, I did it. I did it. It wasn't even as hard or scary as I predicted. And then they're able to take on the next thing and then the next thing. It's like a ladder. We start at the bottom step and then we step on the second one and the third. We don't jump on a ladder on the fourth step, because guess what? We're going to fall down and probably really hurt ourselves. And more importantly, we probably won't go back to that ladder because it caused us damage and it scared us. So the same thing is true for the hierarchy. We need to start gradually and step by step. So that less intense exposure helps prevent overwhelming you and ensures you that you can do this. You gain the confidence. It provides you steady progress, especially when the anxiety is severe. And we have to be able to pace ourselves and know the timing of what we're going to do and when. So for severe anxiety, it's usually more helpful to start with shorter exposure sessions and then start to increase it over time as you become more comfortable. So what I would normally have a client do for 20 minutes, a person with severe anxiety might just be doing it for 10 minutes. And then we pace it and we do it frequently. And then we start upping the time over time as you become more comfortable with it. So there's lots and lots of ways we can adopt and adapt this. And I love that. I'm very creative in the way of making the tailor-made programs for each individual. And we do a lot of feedback back and forth. When I'm working with people in the 10-week win, we are in constant contact every week together. And in between sessions, we are emailing and I'm reviewing the homework and giving some recommendations and getting feedback and providing support. So it's ongoing and it's consistent. And that's what makes habituation occur. Now, the client control, letting you work at the pace that can help reduce feelings of being overwhelmed, helps to make you feel that you're safe enough to engage in this process altogether. I don't want it to be something that you're uncomfortable with long, long time, like for the long duration, sometimes you're uncomfortable, yes, but it should be getting better as you do something over and over. So repetition is key. A third thing is to customization based on your triggers. So again, very specific. We do very unique, specific anxiety triggers. And so some examples are contamination fears, intrusive thoughts, if that pertains to OCD. Some of it's worried about having panic attacks if you live with panic disorder. Some of it's just generalized anxiety where there's everything and anything can trigger it. And the tailor exposure exercises are done according to your triggers, not the general population, not the person next door. It's geared specifically to you and your unique triggers. And that takes some time to dive into and learn. And sometimes when we're working through that process, a client will not even realize some of the triggers until we talk about it and we're able to, and that's where I love to offer additional support. The other thing is contextual variations. So adjusting the context or environment of the exposure. So different settings. So if a person's anxious at work and anxious in a public place, we will work out separate settings and will help the individual generalize your skills and cope with that anxiety in real life situations. And it might be different in each environment. So I have clients that are more nervous and anxious in the workplace than they are in the home. Or they are nervous in several different situations. So they may be nervous about going into a grocery store in town or picking up their mail at the post office, but one store might trigger more anxiety than another. So I'll give you an example. I worked with a client that had trouble going into all the stores in her hometown, and particularly the grocery store, because the grocery store had many aisles and she never knew who was going to be down the next aisle, and that caused a lot of anxiety for her. So we started in other areas of the town. We started just by getting her to drive through town, maybe stopping and picking up some gas, and then work towards, okay, let's do the hierarchy. Let's list all the stores in town, all the areas that you avoid, the reasons you avoid it, and then let's start breaking that down into the anxiety levels, rating it. I usually rate on a scale of 0 to 10, or 1 to 10, 10 being over the top, 1 being very little anxiety. And we start with the 1s and 2s. I'm scanning through the whole list, but I'm not interested in the 8s, the 9s, the 7s initially. I just want to get the person comfortable doing the exposure itself. So we start with the 1s and 2s. The fourth thing is cognitive restructuring. Here we need to address the cognitive distortions. So like I said, when anxiety is really severe, if we can combine the ERP with cognitive behavior therapy techniques, which help address deeply ingrained negative thought patterns, this will help make the exposure easier. And why it makes it easier is it because it reshapes how you interpret the fear situation. So let me give you an example. I avoided going into public stores because I thought that people would accuse me of shoplifting. So I would not go into a store. If I went into a store, I would have to have my pockets pulled out so that I didn't have anything in them, and I'd leave my pockets sticking out. And I even did that at home because I remember my family would say to me, Sandra, your pockets are sticking out, put them back in. And I'd say, oh, that's okay. Or I'd say, oh, I'm just being sloppy. But it was so that I didn't have anything dangerous in my pocket, or I wasn't stealing something. That was my big fear when I went out. So this was a cognitive distortion because I would never steal in my life. I would never harm anyone. But my brain made me think that I would. So another way is supportive affirmations. So being able to say self-talk, which I just did there during exposure, can help us manage anxiety more effectively. So this is a gentle piece, though. This is a very delicate dance that I dance around with people, because sometimes if we do self-talk too much, it becomes a compulsion. So you know what, in the context, it's very individual. So sometimes self-talk will help, but sometimes it won't. But initially, I will allow people to do that self-talk just to get them into the exposure piece. And then we put time limits and what we're going to say to one another or to yourself as your coach. We go over that as we go along in the exposure. So it gets to the point where a person doesn't need that supportive affirmation. And then fifthly, we incorporate coping skills. This is really, really important. I know I talk a lot about it in past Q&As and gathering places. When we have our gathering place every last Wednesday of the month, I also have mentioned this part to be very important, the mindfulness and relaxation, because we need to be able to be mindful and be able to take that mindfulness and relaxation skills and be able to do things, simply breathe. We forget to breathe when we're anxious. We breathe shallow. We don't get the good exchange of oxygen and we're not able to concentrate or focus. So it's important that we practice these skills in the comfort of our home and regularly so that we can utilize them in times of need, especially during ERP. Now, the reassurance-free support, this helps individuals practice tolerating discomfort without reassurance. And that helps to strengthen our ability to manage anxiety. Often this reassurance support comes in the way of what we call enablers. We allow our family and friends and partners to be enabled to give us that reassurance we need. And that's a form of compulsions. Sixth point is we need to be flexible with our response prevention. So in cases where we're talking about severe anxiety, it may not be realistic to eliminate all compulsions immediately. So instead, we need to be encouraged to reduce the frequency. So it's not all or nothing. It's not all black and white. Sometimes we just have to do a harm reduction where we reduce the frequency or intensity of compulsions gradually until you feel ready to stop them completely, or until you do enough exposure that you feel confident about taking it on. There's partial compulsion reduction. So that's partial response prevention. This can help make ERP more manageable initially, especially. And then we address comorbidities. Comorbidities is when someone's living with two or more conditions or disorders. So we talked about anxiety and OCD. That would be considered comorbid, two or more. We talk about often people living with anxiety have depression. I know for myself, I had all three. I had OCD, I had depression and anxiety. So now ERP can be integrated with other therapeutic techniques, which one type of therapy is trauma-focused therapy to address all these mental health needs as it relates to depression or trauma. So there's different techniques, different therapies for each condition. And then there's your support systems, always having someone. And if it's not family, not always is it family. I know people have burned bridges and families have become frustrated and have given up on their loved one, or their loved one has pushed them aside because of their condition. So including family or friends or someone in a support group or whoever that is to you, sometimes we have to create our own family. In this process, you can allow this an opportunity for others to provide you encouragement and accountability. Holding yourself accountable is really important, but being accountable to someone else often makes us do the hard work, especially when anxiety is severe. We need loved ones. However, it's important that they don't offer reassurance because this can reinforce the anxiety, right? Like I mentioned, being an enabler. And then, of course, you need to work with a therapist. Find a therapist in your community that's educated and knowledgeable. Do your due diligence and ask the person, what do you do to help someone going through anxiety? If they are just writing scripts or they're just doing talk therapy, it's not enough. So find someone that's an expert, find a coach, find someone that you can work with. Nowadays, I work with clients all over the world because there's no geographical boundaries with Zoom. We can get on a virtual call anytime. So ensure the person that you're having as a support is good at ERP and and you feel supported throughout the entire process. Very, very important. Another question we have is, what are some common challenges people face when starting ERP for anxiety? Well, there's a few. So we're going to name them, the ones that I often see. And especially when starting ERP for anxiety, the anxiety is high, very high initially. So the idea of facing that fear, like we mentioned before, the stimuli can significantly increase our anxiety. So it may be even hard to start the process. But again, if you're willing to adapt it, modify it, support, coach through it as a therapist, then it makes it easier on the client. The intensity of emotions. The initial exposure can evoke a tense emotional response, and this leads often to feeling overwhelmed. So sometimes I just take a step back, and the client and I will say, okay, let's not do this. Let's stop at this point. Let's continue to work on what we are having results with now. And in time, we'll pick up where we left off as far as the levels and the scale of hierarchy, the stress levels and the level of anxiety. We call that level of anxiety rating with each item on the tailor-made program, that hierarchy, as we mentioned earlier. I call it a SUDS level, and it stands for Subjective Units of Distress Scale. How much stress are people feeling? And I go back to that often throughout the 10-week win or throughout the 6 months when I'm working with a client to make sure that those numbers haven't increased. So here are some common challenges that people face when starting it. Let's go through them, continue to go through them. The second one is avoidance behavior. So we started with higher levels of anxiety, then avoidance. So we may instinctively avoid that exposure due to fear. So that can hinder our progress. And then we become reluctant. There's a lack of motivation or willingness to fully engage in our therapy because of the discomfort it entails. The third thing that becomes a challenge for people when starting ERP is misunderstanding ERP principles. So the expectations of immediate relief. So I always I'm very forthcoming and honest and transparent with my clients. I tell them that the results and the relief will come with time. So don't be discouraged if you don't see the quick improvements. So part of ERP is knowing that there will not necessarily be immediate relief, but the relief that a person is going to experience over time doing CBT and ERP is going to be life-changing. As a coach, my services offer you to get from point A to B much quicker than if you were doing it on your own. I have 58 years experience living with anxiety and OCD. I have 30 years as a psychiatric nurse, and I have the personal part of having gone through it myself. So when I'm working with a client and I'm offering the different packages that I've created on my own to help people with packages that I didn't have when I was going through anxiety and OCD, my programming and the investment that you're putting forward for your mental well-being is an investment that allows you to expedite your results much quicker than if you were not working with me as your coach. So what I'm offering you is the ability to fast forward and accelerate to get you to where you need to be. And by learning and being able to teach you the skills necessary to be able to get the results that you need and want. The fear of confrontation is another misunderstanding. Sometimes people fear that confronting their anxieties could make things worse, and that's a myth. It does not, as we earlier indicated, how it works with the brain. Habituation will and does occur. So here are some common challenges as well when it comes to ERP, the safety behaviors. getting those safety nets out, like I talked about, carrying a calm object, seeking reassurance, can undermine the effectiveness of ERP. So we need to let go. We need to be able to struggle through the ERP with the intent of knowing that it's going to get better, because individuals might struggle with gradual reducing these safety behaviors over time. And then the emotional strain. And I know that many of you have that, and it's very personal and individual, but the stress and frustration during ERP can be emotionally draining and may lead to frustration or a sense of defeat if progress is slow. I know for myself that I had a lot of emotional draining when I went through my ERP, and I remember there was times that I thought I wasn't going to get better, but I'm here to tell you, as long as you don't quit, things will get better with time. And as your coach, I'm able to help you to expedite the results. So what the programs offer you that I've created on my website are opportunities for you to invest in yourself, in the knowledge and the results that I'm able to provide for you as it relates to being able to challenge your anxiety. The emotional resistance is a barrier to overcoming deeply ingrained fear sometimes. So that's why it's important that we also augment other types of support in the process by challenging our faulty beliefs, by doing journals, by documenting, by reviewing your results, by rating your anxiety. All those things are factors in being able to get more emotionally equipped to be able to face your fears. An inconsistent practice. I mentioned this before, the lack of regularity. Irregular participation in that exposure exercise can definitely slow down your progress and reduce the effectiveness of the therapy. So that's why when you're doing ERP, you need to be able to work with a therapist or coach to be able to continue to inspire you to move forward and be able to hold you and me accountable to be sure that we do our part to bring results and success to your program. Now, it's difficult maintaining a routine sometimes because life gets in the way, right? We have work, we have family obligations, so it could be very challenging. But what I recommend to my clients when I started my ERP, I carved out my life, my schedule, so that my free time outside of work was delegated to ERP. I knew it wasn't going to be forever. I knew it was temporary, but I had to make it a priority in my life. So think about yourself. Is overcoming your anxiety a priority for you right now? If so, reach out and get on a 15-minute call, and we can talk about what type of coaching program that I can offer you to provide that support and be able to overcome your anxiety. Navigating relapses, big one. Setbacks and relapses, we have them all the time, especially in the beginning. But these can be discouraging and could lead to a loss of confidence in the therapy process. But like anything else worth having, you have to fight for it. You have to keep moving forward. As Les Brown says, if I can see up, I can get up. And managing flare-ups, knowing how to handle situations when that anxiety spikes can be challenging. It may want you to feel like you're going to give up, but don't. Look at it as an opportunity for learning, an opportunity to grow, and an opportunity to course correct. So those are just some of the questions we had come in. We're going to continue our series on anxiety, but the best thing that we can say right now as we come to an end is join our private Facebook group. You can find us at www.theocdcoach.com or look us up by searching OCD Private Coach. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok under the OCD Coach. Again, my name is Sandra Wallace, and please stay connected and informed on your journey to better mental health. Here is a couple things that I would like to offer you. If you wanted to grab a copy of my first book, Stop Obsessing, Start Overcoming, OCD Leaves Clues, this will help armor to shield you and start challenging and recognizing your OCD for what it truly is. But not only OCD, as I mentioned earlier, the treatment modality is the same for anxiety alone as it is for OCD. So this book will dive into, it's just a small little book. It goes into the importance of CBT, what it is, that's cognitive behavior therapy, and the number one treatment modality technique in CBT is ERP. That can be found on every Amazon website. In Canada, it's .ca, in the US, it's .com, and in other countries, you'll have to look up the listing. I don't know them all by heart, but that's available. And my second book, which talks about from start to finish, my transformation journey. This was a very transformative journey, living with OCD, anxiety, and depression. It's called OCD. The title is OCD, 6 Secrets to the Deliverance from OCD, and uncovering the key to lasting freedom and inner peace in this life-changing book. I'm very vulnerable in this book. I share a lot of what I've gone through. And so I would like to share with you the opportunity to grab your copy now again on Amazon. Feel free to do so. And a third book that I was honored to be part of as an entrepreneur is this book called Reach Your Greatness. It was written by top thought leaders where people share their secrets in living an extraordinary life. So Nick and Megan Unsworth were my mentors, and James Melanchuk of Secret Millionaire is my coach. And the three of them put this book together, and I was able to put a little short chapter in there about my journey with entrepreneurship and being able to help others. As always, since the beginning of COVID, I took a look at what I could do to help in times of adversity. So I have started during that time a free 15-minute session to just get started and learn more about you and ways that I may be able to help you. So during your path to well-being, it's important that you don't do it alone, that you get trained professionals that know what to do to help you get beyond your anxiety, because there is life beyond anxiety. I'm here to tell you that because that was me at one time. I wasn't able to work or go out or do anything because my anxiety overcame me. But now I learned to live alongside it, and it's very seldom shows up. So here, if you want to scan this to book a call, I'd be more than happy to talk with you. So I want to thank you. And just remember, mark your calendar. Every first Monday of the month is our Q&A. The next one is November 4th at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. There's the Zoom link. It's always the same Zoom meeting. And you can send your questions here by filling out the form on our website at www.theocdcoach.com. Our email is info@theocdcoach.com. And as always, you can reach out to us at 204-295-4408. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, and YouTube. I'll meet you there. Remember, you're not alone in this journey. I'm here to guide you towards a much brighter and less anxious future. I'll meet you there.